What are some of the most dire conditions that Wolverine has survived against all odds? And more importantly, how has he died before? Over the years, Wolverine has become an icon for a number of different reasons, not least of which are his fierce adamantium claws, his iconic yellow suit, and his berserker rage. But perhaps one of his most well-known attributes is his absolute inability to be killed. So what kinds of things does his healing factor allow him to survive? And how can anyone actually stand to kill Marvel's most famous mutant? Well, today, let's discuss some of the craziest things that Wolverine has walked away from, and then get into how he has actually been killed before. Let's start small with the time Logan was devoured by the Incredible Hulk. Wolverine's rivalry with the Hulk is one of the most persistent feuds in all of Marvel, and while each of them is capable of facing down just about any threat, the two routinely match each other blow for blow. During the Old Man Logan story, this rivalry takes a gruesome turn, one that sees the Hulk consume Wolverine whole. He ate Logan, who regenerated within the Hulk's intestines and then proceeded to cut his way out of the Jade Giant, ultimately declaring himself the victor. This, however, may be one of the most disgusting things that Logan has ever survived, but may not be the most impressive. So now, let's touch on the time that Logan walked away from an atomic bomb. The event in question actually takes place not in a Wolverine story and comic, but in a Venom Volume 1, number 8 and 9, where Logan comes face to face with a supervillain simply known as the Suit. As the battle comes to a standstill, he and his team float the idea of engaging Plan B, which is to drop an atomic bomb on the Suit in order to finally neutralize him. But unfortunately for Logan, he was at the epicenter of this explosion. At the beginning of the next issue though, it is revealed that Logan was able to survive this blast, and the exact reason why is fascinating. In some cases, we get to see that his adamantium skeleton survives these blasts, and since blood is produced from bone marrow, Wolverine was able to regrow the rest of his body since his living cells survived the atomic explosion. Since his bones are just coated with adamantium, not made of adamantium, Logan is able to grow himself back. But in just a minute, we'll get into a much more bizarre explanation. This is important to remember though, as it serves as the greatest detail in Logan's regeneration, and this is why he is able to regrow himself from just a single drop of blood before. So as long as any of Logan's DNA remains, he will be able to reconstitute himself. This is also adapted into the Fox X-Men universe, where in the Wolverine, it is revealed that Wolverine was within the blast radius of the Hiroshima explosion during the waning days of World War II. This encounter is a little more clear-cut since the danger to him wasn't being blown apart, it was the radiation poisoning that would have killed any normal being. Fortunately for Logan though, his healing factor acts faster than radiation sickness does, and he was able to keep himself alive until he reached a safe distance. The stranger explanation for some of Wolverine's greatest survival feats though was set up in Wolverine number 48, which takes place during the Civil War story. Here, Logan survives a point-blank blast from nitro, which is on par with the previous explosion that we mentioned, an atomic bomb. But here, we get to see more about how he is able to bring himself back from the brink. Wolverine meets a specter by the name of Lazaire, who states that if Wolverine can beat him in a fight, then he gets to return to the land of the living. Several issues later though, Wolverine's love interest was declared brain dead, and Doctor Strange was tasked with investigating where he himself would encounter Lazaire. Strange, however, comes to the understanding that this being is actually Azrael, an angel of death, an angel tasked with escorting souls from the mortal realm into the afterlife. This means that Wolverine, on several occasions dating all the way back to World War I, has fought the Angel of Death and clawed his way back to the land of the living. In some iterations of the Wolverine character, this is the official explanation for how Logan is able to skirt death on the regular basis, and it leaves a few compelling questions that we'll get into in just a minute, but there are still a few compelling events left to explore that Logan has survived. Next, let's take a look at the time he and Jean Grey visited the surface of the sun. Stuck adrift aboard asteroid M, Logan and Jean were unable to escape a collision with the sun, and in order to spare Jean the pain of having to endure a violent death at the center of the solar system, Logan killed her and faced the collision head-on alone. When he arrived at the sun, the surface boiled his skin away and may have ended up killing him if it hadn't been for Jean, who rose as the Phoenix Force and was able to pull him away from the edge and his next meeting with the Angel of Death. This begs the question though regarding exactly how Logan can actually be killed. Contrary to popular belief, he has actually been killed on a few different occasions in the comics before. The first way is simply to wait him out, which for normal people is not an option. But several entities in the Marvel Universe have a long enough lifespan that this may be possible and that they can outlive the Wolverine. We know that Logan ages incredibly slowly and is already well into his hundreds by the time the most mainline Marvel events take place. What Old Man Logan revealed though is that his prolonged exposure to adamantium is slowly killing him. Normally, Logan's healing factor has no problem keeping up with the adamantium poisoning, and the older he gets, his healing factor is slowly beginning to erode as well. This resulted in his eventual death, not just at the end of the Old Man Logan story, but in the Logan film as well. But what about characters who don't have time on their side? How can Wolverine in his prime be most effectively threatened and completely, unambiguously killed? First, we know of a hypothetical situation that Logan himself fears, but we have a few cases where he has actually died before. In Wolverine Black, White, and Blood, he expresses a potent fear of drowning, and Logan explains in detail exactly why it is so dangerous for him. Wolverine is strong enough to swim, but his heavy adamantium skeleton makes it difficult to do so, and if he were to ever pass out within the water, he would promptly sink to the bottom. His healing factor, however, would end up reviving him, leaving him pinned to the bottom only to drown again and again, over and over with no end in sight. No gasps of oxygen, and he would be perpetually sentenced to drowning for eternity, or at least as long as he would live. Arguably a fate worse than death. Depending on the circumstances, it would likely be nearly impossible for Logan to swim out, showing that in this way, this is an easy path to incapacitate him, even if it doesn't outright force him to remain dead. We also know that some pathogens have proven to be particularly effective with Logan, perhaps most notable of which is the zombie virus from Earth 2149. First brought over by the Sentry, this zombie infection began to spread like wildfire across the Marvel Universe, and while Wolverine fought valiantly to defend the X-Men, he himself was eventually bitten by a zombie. What's interesting about this though is that he ended up turning, proving that his healing factor has a particular blind spot for an inability to address at least this particular virus. One of his most famous deaths, though, comes in his final battle with Dr. Abraham Cornelius, the former mastermind of the Weapon X program. The doctor who had previously shown success in transforming Wolverine into the first Weapon X patient sought to replicate the results again. In doing so, he constructed a lab with vats of liquid adamantium. When Logan punctured these tanks, he was soaked in the substance, which quickly hardened around him, suffocating Logan and freezing him in place. This did result in the definitive death of Logan for a period of time, and this has proven to be the best long-term solution. But what's interesting about Wolverine is that his death works differently due to his deal with Azrael. Since making an agreement with him, he gets to fight for his life after crossing the threshold of death. His body can die while his soul lives on, or more disturbingly, the opposite can occur. On one particular occasion, his soul was fractured, and a sliver of it was used to create the antagonist known as Shogun, one of the most menacing armored villains. When he forced Wolverine to swallow a grenade, his mortal body was ripped apart. Normally for Logan, this would be an injury that he could easily walk away from, but his battle with Azrael did not go as planned. In this particular case, Logan actually lost his battle with the Angel, and his body healed. This meant that physically Logan was fine and survived, but his soul was no longer present within his body. This led to a disturbing conundrum where Wolverine, in all sense of the spiritual term, was dead and had crossed over, but his body was still functioning. While these are a few ways that Wolverine has been killed in the comics, getting him into any of these situations is easier said than done, and most that try end up cut up into pieces. This goes to show just how unstoppable Logan really is, and if he is to die, there are only a few confirmed ways to actually succeed in doing it. But anyway, friends, what do you think of Logan's uncanny ability never to die and not be killed? Which of these ways do you think is the most effective way at taking out the Wolverine? And what are some of your favorite instances of Wolverine surviving where he absolutely should not have been able to? As always, my friends, Hulk smash that subscribe button for more Marvel lore and have a phenomenal day.